There we go.
Oops. Well.
Hello, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Baridilla Dube. I'm the training specialist with Grounded Solutions Network, and we're so happy to have you on today. We will wait about 1 or 2 minutes as we have people log in, and then we'll kick this presentation off. Thank you for coming.
With FHA's National Servicing Center. Today, I'm going to be presenting FHA's law.
Once again, lots of people are joining. Hello, my name is Baridilla Dube. Thank you for coming. We will wait about 1 more minute before we kick this thing off. All right, for those of you who have just joined, I will repeat my name one more time. This is Baridilla Dube, and I'm the training specialist at Grounded Solutions Network. We're so happy that you all could join us. Grounded Solutions Network cultivates communities, equitable, inclusive, and rich in opportunity by advancing affordable housing solutions that last for generations. And to begin, I want to let you all know how to set up your audio connection if you're new to Zoom. So to connect to your audio, we recommend that you join through computer audio by selecting the computer audio button at the top of the pop-up window, or by having the systems call you by entering your number there. Next slide. And if you didn't get that pop-up window, also at the bottom of your screen, you can see many options. And we do ask that everyone mute themselves so we can maintain call quality and also stop your video. And if you have any questions, you can always put it in the chat at any time. Next slide. And lastly, we want to share some Zoom tips with you all. It's helpful to sit as close to your Wi-Fi as possible, or if you even have an Ethernet cord, you can use that. Like I said before, please stop your video and mute your audio as well, and that helps preserve bandwidth and recording quality. And this webinar will be recorded. And next, if you do have ongoing audio issues, please consider dialing in, as I mentioned before. And for those of you who may be joining by tablet or phone, some of these options will be in different places, but so please be aware of that. So with that said, I'm very happy to kick this thing off because we have a tight schedule today. So I'll go ahead and pass it to Robert Burns.
Great, thank you, Baridilla. I really appreciate the chance to be on with all of you today. And like everyone on the call, we're all in a very different environment than we were a month ago, and appreciate that each of you is taking some time today away from what I know is a hectic schedule, both probably professionally and personally, everybody dealing with different situations around the country. And it was exciting for me just a moment ago to see we had broken 100 participants on this call. So very excited to see that. And on behalf of our entire team at Grounded Solutions and our wonderful board of directors, I just want to say thank you for joining and welcome you to the call. I probably, like a lot of you, have been feeling the urgency of responding to phone calls, emails, a real cycle of webinars on topics that are very rich. And today's, I hope, is very relevant to your work. I'm sure it will be. And all of the constant updates that are coming on a daily basis from the COVID-19 impacts around the country. And we really have seen how the inequities across the country have played out during this crisis. And today we really share a primary goal of obtaining key information that we think is going to be very valuable to you, to your organization, to help the folks on the ground that are truly vulnerable and the communities that are most in need in the crisis. And our goal at Grounded Solutions during this time is to achieve immediate and lasting housing stability and to provide the essential shelter required by everybody to survive this pandemic. We all deserve the opportunity to live in safe, quality, stable housing, no matter race, class, income, zip code, or health status. And Grounded Solutions understands that the immediate task of survival requires new ideas, resources, and powerful collaboration from all of us today. And today we're excited to have the National Low Income Housing Coalition, Fannie Mae, and Freddie Mac join our virtual convening to share their expertise, knowledge, and actively seeking to be part of the collective solutions to this crisis. And these are incredibly valuable partners, and I appreciate each of them giving their time today. We hope today's meeting leaves you with more details about the types of national support that's targeted to avoid mortgage delinquency and to promote lasting affordability. More you're hearing about this on the front, and today's will be most current as of today. Our conversation will also serve as a beginning point for Grounded Solutions' intentional efforts to increase our common understanding of what new resources are out there and programs that are available to assist families in need. We also remain committed to expanding the scale of Grounded Solutions and impact and the contribution to equitable housing and economic recovery throughout the nation as we go through this crisis and come out on the other side. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Emily Thaden, who's going to introduce our first guest presenter. Over to you, Emily.
Thank you, Robert. And as Robert said, thank you everyone for making time to join us on the call today, and especially to our national partners. So we will first hear from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, both with updates and explanations of the CARES Act, and also covering what's still needed and hopefully what is actually coming next on the federal policy side. And then we'll be hearing from both of the enterprises on what's been rolled out for mortgage relief and what they're doing to still enable home buyers to close on loans today. After each presenter, we are going to have a brief Q&A period, and as Veradillo mentioned, we ask that you please enter any questions you have as we go in the chat box, and we will moderate those in the interest of time. So with that, let me first present Sarah Sadian with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. I really have to say, a huge thank you to her and her team. They have been leading and coordinating federal advocacy on so many critical housing related needs during the pandemic. And with that, let me turn it over to you, Sarah.
Thank you so much. I appreciate being given the opportunity to speak on the call. I want to run through some of the resources and protections that are included in the CARES Act, and then talk a little bit about what's on the horizon in terms of additional resources that are needed for folks. We were really pleased to see that the CARES Act included about $12 billion in resources for housing and homelessness. This is largely because of an incredible amount of advocacy that's been taking place at the state and local level, and I just want to thank all of you and all the folks on the call for their work to draw attention to the needs facing low-income people in the CARES Act and working with members of Congress to include those funds. Of those $12 billion, about $4 billion is slated for people who are experiencing homelessness. I'll just briefly mention that because many people experiencing homelessness are living in congregate settings, whether that's in shelters or in encampments, and because they are more likely to have underlying health issues, they are at a particularly high risk of severe illness and death from coronavirus. And there's very little protections or abilities to engage in social distancing. And so those funds are really geared towards that purpose of trying to prevent an outbreak among a particularly vulnerable population. The other remaining funds for HUD include $5 billion in CDBG grants that can be used by state and local governments to also address housing and homelessness needs, and increases in funding for housing choice vouchers, project-based rental assistance, public housing, tribal nations, HOPWA, Section 202 and 811, and fair housing. Most of those funds are largely intended to help existing households that are currently receiving housing assistance. Those funds can be used by housing providers to address additional operating expenses we're hearing that a lot of them are dealing with staffing issues and with extra deep cleaning and other efforts that are needed to keep their residents safe. And those funds are also intended largely to allow for people who are seeing job loss or reduced wages to adjust their contributions to rent and then to provide the additional funding that's needed to those housing providers. Beyond HUD programs, there were other provisions in the CARES Act that we were really pleased to see that included a moratorium on all foreclosures and evictions in properties that are supported by the federal government or backed by Fannie Mae, FHA, Freddie Mac loans, and I'm sure our other speakers will get to that a little later too. So the moratorium on eviction applies to a really broad array of renters, including those who live in housing supported by HUD, USDA, or Treasury, meaning the low-income housing tax credit. That moratorium lasts for 120 days, starting from the date of enactment, which was late March. The bill also provides additional protections for renters who live in homes that are backed by, as I mentioned, FHA, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, when they're in rental properties where the property owner requests a forbearance, that can be provided on the condition that they don't evict tenants or charge them late fees. And there are other protections for homeowners, although I am not quite an expert in that, so I'll skip that. And finally, there's also resources that are outside of the HUD process, like a $150 billion coronavirus relief fund that goes to state, tribal, and local governments to help them address essentially any of their expenditures related to responding to coronavirus, and $45 billion in FEMA resources, which have been used so far in California, New Jersey, North Carolina, and some other places to, again, address their most pressing needs facing homeless populations. I will say that Congress is right now looking at a 3.5 bill, so a smaller package that includes additional small business loans and some premium pay for frontline workers. That bill is very narrow in scope, and in part that's because there's some limitations facing Congress right now. Because members of Congress are not in DC, the only bills that can get passed are ones that can pass unanimously, which is a very hard task to realize in any circumstance, and even now, especially when we're talking about large spending bills. We expect that bill might move next week, as soon as next week. But there are conversations about what happens when Congress is able to come back into DC. We're hearing that might happen around early May, although that could be pushed back too. There's a lot of conversation about just how big the scope of that bill will be, whether it will just focus on the continuing pressing needs facing this health crisis, or if there'll be an opportunity for broader resources, more stimulus-like resources, or an infrastructure package, if you will. When it comes to those resources, we're continuing to most urgently push for additional homelessness resources, another $11.5 billion to address the needs in that population. We're also seeing, we're very concerned about the needs of low-income renters who may be experiencing job loss and for whom unemployment insurance or the direct stimulus checks that were included in the first bill might not reach them or will run out after a certain period of time. We've calculated that $100 billion is needed to ensure that people who are at the greatest risk of homelessness, low-income renters, are able to stay in their homes. And there's a provision right now, a proposal from Representative Heck and Waters, and will soon be introduced by Senator Brown, that will do just that and provide $100 billion for emergency rental assistance. And we encourage you to talk to your members of Congress about that. If this package is something that looks broader and is focused on infrastructure as well, we think it's really important not just to focus on the stimulative effects of an infrastructure package, but also to use those funds as a unique opportunity to address the underlying systemic reasons for why we have a housing crisis and why that housing crisis is disproportionately impacting people of color. We want to see those funds be used in a way that can help address those equity issues and reach the lowest income households who we know are struggling the most right now. So we're hoping that if the package is that broad, that we'll see resources like funding for the National Housing Trust Fund, public housing repair dollars, additional vouchers to serve people who have the greatest needs and who were struggling even before this pandemic took place. I will also say that there are opportunities for folks to join us in advocacy if you're so inclined to do that. Our speakers earlier mentioned that we're hosting a weekly national call, 2:30 p.m. on every Monday, where we give feedback on, or updates about how federal resources and advocacy opportunities. We hear from folks in the field about what their pressing needs are, and we dig into some issues a little more deeply, including how particular populations are faring, including undocumented people, people with disabilities, Native people as well, who can be overlooked in our current system. We are about to announce later today that we'll be having working groups focused on different issues. We know that there's just so much out there right now and a lot of information and a lot of things developing at the same time. We want to make sure that we're providing a space for peer sharing and best practices and lessons learned. And so we'll be having working group calls on how to access FEMA resources, state and local implementation of the CARES Act, and longer term solutions that are needed to reform either the way the disaster recovery system is working or just making sure that if there is this large infrastructure package that we can do so in a way that also addresses racial equity. And with that, I'll open it up for questions from the audience.
Thank you so much, Sarah. To start off with, let me ask a question that I had for you initially. There have been many ideas around how to address the great need for emergency rental assistance, spanning from things like increasing unemployment to providing tax credits to landlords, and then obviously to increase or expand the voucher program. In light of National Low Income Housing Coalition's recommendations, I'd love for you to share what your recommendation is one more time, how you relate that to equity, and as you mentioned, systemic change, and why you ultimately are recommending the expansion of vouchers.
Okay, great. Well, I think, so there's lots of different models that can be used to provide emergency rental assistance. And part of our conversation is geared around what Congress wants to do. Appropriators and authorizers seem to be on the same page about providing emergency rental assistance through the Emergency Solutions Grants Program, but to broaden eligibility under that. I think that their intention is to get resources out as quickly as possible to communities to provide as much flexibility and as little regulatory barriers in order to do that. We also support other mechanisms of providing that assistance, but it seems like that really is the consensus way of addressing this issue. We are also, I will say, pushing for long-term resources too. We know that with the coming economic troubles and current economic troubles, we're likely to see even more people who are severely cost burdened. We're likely to see even more people who are just on the cusp of facing evictions and in worst cases, homelessness. And we also know that that harm is disproportionately felt among people of color. And so we need to have resources that can very quickly address those needs and reach those populations. In terms of a larger infrastructure, I think the underlying, one of the structural issues that we talked about earlier of what's leading to this housing crisis is that there's a market failure at the very low end of the income spectrum where the private sector cannot build housing. The people who are most severely impacted by that market failure, again, are people of color and other marginalized communities, including people with disabilities. Until we address that underlying systemic issue, we will never solve the housing crisis. And so we want to make sure that especially when Congress is putting massive amounts of resources into the economy, that it's being used in a really smart, efficient way to address those systemic issues too.
That's great, Sarah. Question from our audience is, can you speak to any aid that is being provided to undocumented workers?
Yeah, that's a really great question. This is something that we've brought up with Nancy Pelosi's office and with other offices too. It's very difficult, as you can imagine, to explicitly allow for undocumented people to be able to access resources like unemployment insurance and the direct stimulus checks that were in the CARES Act. To my knowledge, undocumented people are not eligible for those resources. However, we have been looking into other funds that were provided. I mentioned before that homeless assistance grants, CDBG funds, and the coronavirus relief funds are all very flexible resources that cities and states can be using to fill the gaps in what the federal government provides. So those funds can be used to provide short-term assistance to undocumented people, and we are actually releasing later today guidance for state and local governments on how they can do that.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question for you is, how can tenants find out if their building owners have requested or received forbearance? And I realize that we do have the enterprises speaking after this, but I know that we've all been a part of conversations talking about how this is a really difficult nut to crack. It does seem to mandate that we have a one-stop kind of public resource for this kind of information to be found out. Can you share National Low Income Housing Coalition's thinking on this?
Yes, absolutely. You are exactly right that it's very difficult for renters to find out whether or not they are covered by this moratorium, and even for homeowners who might not know whether or not their loan was, securitized by Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. We've reached out to the regulator over them, FHFA, to encourage them to make this information publicly available for tenants. And we'll continue to push for that and encourage the agencies to do that. But we're also using this as an opportunity to remind Congress about why they need to make a uniform national standard when it comes to evictions and foreclosure moratoriums, so that there isn't this question about whether or not a renter is covered or not. There should be one policy across the board for all households.
Thanks, Sarah. Another question for you, and this will be our last one. Someone on the chat box mentioned that they have several multifamily developments in various stages, and their financing is drying up for their projects. Is there any support coming out for lenders or investors to keep financing flowing? Is this something that is being discussed in the next round of stimulus?
Yeah, I think this really depends on just how broad in scope that next large coronavirus response package is. If it's still focused on the very immediate needs, then I doubt that we would see resources in the bill to do that. There are conversations happening right now about what sorts of infrastructure dollars might be needed, and I think Congress is thinking about those sorts of supports as falling into that broader infrastructure stimulative category. I know folks are definitely focused on this, but I think we're all waiting and seeing what's possible in the next bill.
Great. Sarah, thank you so much for your time. And I realize that there's more questions than we can get to, but we will be making sure that we get the resources that were mentioned today out, including information on National Low Income Housing Coalition's weekly Monday call. And so with that, we're going to turn to mortgage financing. Many of you on the call, I know, have homeowners that have lost income or can't make their mortgage payments. And that's why we've asked the enterprises to join us today and talk about what they're doing in terms of mortgage relief. So first, let me introduce Dan Tacona from Freddie Mac. Many of you who are part of Grounded Solutions Network have met him at our conferences due to his work that he's done on shared equity homeownership duty to serve. And we also have on the call Rob Bramer and some of his colleagues from the Community Lending Division of Fannie Mae. They've been a long-term partner and supporter of shared equity homeownership solutions and affordable housing generally, just like Freddie Mac. So before we get started, I want to make sure that everyone here knows that the Federal Housing Finance Agency has mandated alignment in terms of COVID-19 mortgage relief options for both of the enterprises. So rather than have both Fannie and Freddie repeat what they are offering and doing, they've agreed to split up the content that we're going to cover on the webinar today. But do know that both Fannie and Freddie are doing this work and offering relief. And so now let me turn it over to Dan to start us off. He's going to help us understand what's going on in terms of forbearance and deferral options. And then we will take a brief pause and have both Dan and Rob take some questions for us and then turn the floor over to Rob. While they're speaking, I'm just going to be presenting some, listing some key resources that are on both of their websites. And we will be sending these out after the webinar as well. So let me turn it over to you, Dan.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Emily, and all of you at Grand Solution Network. First, I want to take an opportunity to say thank you for the work that you do on behalf of Freddie Mac, and I feel confident that I can also speak on behalf of our colleagues at Fannie Mae when I say this. We are deeply thankful for all the work that you do and will continue to do to help many homeowners sustain homeownership through this crisis. Second, we consider this crisis as an evolving crisis, and we continue to get feedback from the market on what is working, what is not working, and what challenges the industry is encountering as they and us navigate through the crisis. So as we evaluate the situation and learn more about what's happening across the industry, we continue to define solutions and refine solutions to address these challenges. So with that, we'll continue to provide updates to the market as those solutions are defined. And lastly, I want to reaffirm that we remain committed to continue to support the housing industry, make sure financing continues to be available for borrowers across the nation, and provide solutions to the market to help homeowners sustain homeownership and certainly avoid foreclosure. With that, as Emily mentioned, Freddie Mac and Fannie Mae, under the direction of our regulator, have jointly designed several temporary flexibilities to help homeowners that are affected by the COVID-19 crisis. And the flexibilities that myself and my colleagues from Fannie Mae will review are applicable, as Emily said, to loans that are sold to either Fannie or Freddie. The easiest way for a borrower or homeowner to determine whether who owns their loan is by going to either of the GSE's websites to look up with some of their personal information to look up their loan. And they'll be able to see whether their loan is owned by either Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac. And if it is, then the options and flexibilities that we're going to go through apply to that particular homeowner. I'm going to address forbearance options and the suspension of foreclosures. As was said, as provided in the CARES Act, servicers must suspend all foreclosure actions, including foreclosure sales, through May 17th of 2020. And this includes initiation of any judicial or non-judicial foreclosure process, move for foreclosure judgment, or also order of sale. The suspension or foreclosure moratorium does not apply to any mortgages that are secured by properties that have been determined to be vacant or abandoned. So that's one of the actions that we have taken at the direction of our regulator. The other one is related to forbearance. And this became effective immediately when it was first announced on March 18th, 2020. And it applies to homeowners that are affected by a hardship directly or indirectly related to COVID-19. I wanted to highlight that the homeowner, him or herself, does not have to have tested positive for COVID-19 or be directly affected by COVID-19. I'll go through a couple of scenarios, but I wanted to highlight that because that's been a question that we have often gotten. I also wanted to make sure that forbearance, I define forbearance for you, because that's been another question that we have been getting. So forbearance is basically a written agreement that defines whether the borrower may be able to make either reduced or no monthly payments at all for a specified time period. I want to highlight that forbearance is not payment forgiveness. And I do that because that's a question that we have been getting a lot. And there seems to be some confusion in the market as to whether forbearance is actually forgiven mortgage payments. It is not. It's an agreement that either reduces or provides the borrower to suspend monthly payments for a time period. Our forbearance option, it's up to 12 months, and it can start with a period of 180 days, and that period is renewable up to 12 months. During the forbearance period, we are requiring that the servicer waives assessments of penalties or late fees. The forbearance option is available regardless of whether the property is owner-occupied, a second home, or an investment property. And let me talk about some of the eligible hardships. So it could be job loss, it could be reduced income, illness, or other issues that may impact the homeowner's ability to make monthly mortgage payments. As I mentioned, the homeowner does not need to have contracted COVID-19 or tested positive for it to qualify. And one eligible hardship that I wanted to also highlight is that an increase in housing expenses due to hardship outside of the borrower's control is also an eligible hardship. So even if the homeowner maintains their job and they may not have a reduction of income for this temporary flexibilities that we have, if the borrower has suffered from an increase in their housing expenses, right, as a result of everything that is going on, then that would actually qualify and help the borrower attain forbearance. I also wanted to highlight that no documentation is required from the homeowner in order to verify the hardship, but that the servicer must actually establish contact with the borrower. It's either the borrower, the co-borrower, or a trusted advisor, such as a housing counselor. And we do that because we want the servicer to discuss the most appropriate option for the delinquency resolution. We require that the servicer does make every attempt to be able to get into contact with either the borrower, co-borrower, or a trusted advisor. And we're asking them to have a conversation with the borrower to determine the reason for the delinquency, whether the reason is temporary or permanent in nature, determining the occupancy status of the property, borrower's ability to repay the debt, and educating the borrower on the availability of alternatives to foreclosure as appropriate. Also, to get commitment from the borrower to either resolve the delinquency through some of the traditional methods that we have, or working with them to engage in an alternative to foreclosure solution. In the event that the servicer and borrower or homeowner cannot agree on the specific time frame for the forbearance length, or if the servicer is not able to continue to maintain communications with the borrower under the circumstances that we have, we are requiring the servicer to provide the term requested by the borrower not to exceed 180 days. So that's something that just to keep in mind. There's an additional flexibility that we're introducing. Then, even though there is no documentation required from the homeowner to verify the hardship, there is a forbearance agreement that it is required from the servicer to be provided to the homeowner in writing, And that agreement, we require the servicer to sign it, but does not have to be signed by the borrower or returned to the servicer. So it is really an agreement that documents the forbearance terms, and it is something that we're requiring our servicers to provide in writing to the homeowner. And again, the homeowner doesn't need to sign it, doesn't need to return it back, and neither a signature or returning it back cannot be a condition of the forbearance plan. The agreement indicates the duration of the forbearance plan. It includes the effective date and the expiration date of the forbearance plan, and if applicable, the due date of the first payment and the amount of that payment. In some instances, the forbearance is not a suspension of payments, but it is a reduction of payments. So in those cases, we want that agreement to highlight what that payment would be. Generally, the forbearance options are suspend the payments or reduce payments, and the principal amount plus interest must be lower than the contractual P&I in the case of reduced payments. And the terms, they can be between 1 and 6 months to start with, and there can be one or more extensions of that 1 to 6 month period. And the total period of the forbearance cannot exceed 12 months. So again, that's based on the conversations between the servicer and the borrower, the first forbearance plan can be anywhere between 1 to 6 months, and at the expiration of that forbearance term, then the homeowner is eligible for an extension, and that extension can also be anywhere between 1 and 6 months. And the total amount of the forbearance term cannot be more than 12 months. The agreement also needs to state that at the end of the forbearance period, the borrower must either cure the delinquency through a reinstatement, partial reinstatement plus a repayment plan, or a repayment plan or payoff of the mortgage, or in some instances submit a borrower response package that is it's documentation where the borrower provides information to the servicer so that the servicer can evaluate the borrower for a workout option, and my colleagues at Fannie Mae will go through some of those options. During the forbearance period, we require servicers that no late charges be accrued, as I mentioned. However, the servicer may require payment of any late charges that were due or accrued at the time the servicer entered into the forbearance agreement with the homeowner. So if the borrower was late prior to the forbearance agreement, the servicer may require those to be paid. But during the forbearance period, no late charges are to be accrued. Also, once the forbearance agreement is sent to the borrower, if the homeowner or borrower defaults on the forbearance agreement, then at that point, the servicer may charge or start accruing late fees. Staying within the boundaries of that forbearance agreement is important for the homeowner to be able to maintain eligibility and avoid any additional fees. And last but not least, the servicer is not to report to the credit bureaus borrowers that are on an active forbearance plan, repayment plan, or trial period plan related to COVID-19 hardships, and this is consistent with the CARES Act. So the best way for a homeowner to take advantage of this plan is to contact their servicer, which is the company that is listed on the mortgage statement, which, as you know, may or may not be the same organization that issued the mortgage originally, right? And that would start the process. And as I mentioned before, what we're requiring the servicer to do is establish contact with either the borrower, co-borrower, or a trusted advisor. In this case, many of you may play the role of a trusted advisor and be able to help the borrower discuss some of these options with their servicers. So with that, Emily, I think you wanted to take questions if there are any.
Yes, let's take a couple quick questions, and Rob, feel free to jump in as well. So
Okay.
the first question I have here is, will the forbearance debt be automatically capitalized and the loan recast over an extended term, or is there something else that has to be done there?
Well, if you don't mind, I mean, I'll take that. Can I basically say that I'll answer that with what I'm going to say when I talk? So I'll go into more detail on that.
That's great. Let's leave that one for when you present, Rob.
Right.
And I think that we have a couple clarifying questions around, Dan, when you were explaining who's eligible for forbearance and what constitute hardship. So one question is, what if a homeowner was between jobs when COVID-19 hit and now cannot find a new job? Is that covered as hardship?
Yes.
Excellent.
Yeah, and if I can piggyback off that, it's basically anybody who can attest to the fact that they have been affected by COVID-19. We're kind of leaving the language pretty vague when it comes to that because everybody's impacted differently. So yes, all they have to do is basically attest that they have been impacted.
Another question was if childcare expenses have increased due to schools being closed, does that also constitute eligibility for forbearance?
Yes, and that's actually the best example for what I mentioned earlier. You know, increasing housing expenses in general due to the hardship outside of the borrower's control is a qualifying hardship. So yes.
Okay, excellent. And the final question I have for you, Dan, is if owners can pay sooner than their forbearance period, should they, and what's the upside for them to do so?
You know, that's a question that, you know, from a policy perspective or a guidelines perspective, I cannot answer. That is really based on each borrower's situation. I think my answer would be that needs to be decided by the homeowner based on their unique situation. I think a home counselor may be better equipped to address that question because they'll probably have access to more of the information about that particular borrower. And that's also part of the conversation with the servicer, right? You know, that's what would guide whether the borrower is put on a forbearance plan that either reduces the monthly payments for a period of time to give a little bit more flexibility and cash flow to the borrower, or completely, eliminate those monthly payments for a period of time. It's dependent. The answer depends on the unique situation of each borrower.
Okay, thank you very much. And so with that, let me turn the floor over to Rob Bramer at Fannie Mae to discuss modifications and flexibilities with their offerings for current homeowners.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Can you hear me okay?
We can.
Okay, good, okay. Well, really, before I jump into this, I really want to, it really needs to be said that, you know, we're all kind of in the middle of some majorly uncharted territory here. You know, we've all been touched by the stories that we're hearing, and, you know, understand that we're definitely here to help make this thing a little bit easier and help you maneuver through this. So, again, thank you for everything that you do. So I wanted to get that out of there first. But really want to start first by really talking about understanding the hardship. I mean, this is really probably one of the most key things that you really have to take a look at. You know, how does it actually impact the borrower? You know, the one thing that we really throw out there is that you got to go out there and probe more, you know, ask those probing questions and get the specific circumstances like Dan had said earlier. You know, find out, you know, how does this specifically impact you? Like I said, it could be impacted based on increased child care. It could be impacted based on the fact that somebody in your household has been contributing to the housing expenses that now doesn't have a job. You know, it could be business closures. It could be a loss of hours. It could be a loss of employment. So there's so many things out there that could impact the borrower in order to be able to make their mortgage payment. So, you know, definitely we ask those probing questions, find out really what's going on, you know, understand the impact. You know, it could be something directly that your medical expenses, you know, due to COVID-19 have affected you to do this. So again, understanding the impact really is one of the key things that you have to get into. So in order to do that, you really have to understand, is the impact, is it a long-term hardship or is it short-term? We kind of group this into 4 different categories. Long-term, short-term, is it resolved or unresolved? Well, obviously, if we're talking about COVID-19, it's not resolved. So, and we really don't know how long this impact is really going to be lasting. So, we're looking at the fact that it could be a long-term situation. But, explain to the homeowners the importance of being able to pair the right workout solution based on the hardship that they have. There's been so much misinformation out there talking about what's actually available. People talk about, I want the payment forgiveness plan, or, they bring up all the stuff that's going on out there when, in fact, you can't really talk about a long-term solution if there is not if the hardship hadn't been resolved. So again, it's one of those things you definitely have to make sure that you determine, we want to be able to pair the right situation up and the right solution with the situation that's happening. Again, offering them a modification when the hardship hadn't been resolved is really not going to be a good idea, and it's not really going to be setting the borrower up for any kind of success down the road. We already talked about the forbearance, so I'm not really going to hit that, but just understand on the forbearance is that that's a hardship that has not been resolved. So again, we put the forbearance out there to effectively give the borrower a little breathing room, be able to kind of get their feet underneath them to figure out, kind of what's going on. So during that time, communication, we talk about, right party contact. Communication is key. I mean, I can't really stress that enough. So again, you've got to make sure that you keep those lines of communication open. Now, one thing I wanted to kind of throw out there too is that we have a program, both Fannie and Freddie, that we rolled out basically at the same time that all this mess happened, and it was basically called our payment deferral program. Now, understand that this was not a solution that was thrown out there as a response to COVID-19. And effectively what's going to happen, I'm going to just hit the high points, but I'm going to put a little caveat at the end of my statement here. But again, it's not available until July 1st of this year. But what happens is that we're going to take the delinquent payments and move them to the end of the loan. And that's something that people have been asking for a long time. But again, this was not a program that was actually put into effect to combat COVID-19. So again, in this situation, we're talking about the fact that the homeowner's hardship has been resolved. And it's important that we understand that, this is something that has to be a resolved hardship. Now, what I was talking about earlier is that pay attention to the lender letters, because there's going to be changes to this program as it relates to COVID-19. So we have new lender letters that are coming out. Oh, it seems like daily. It's crazy, but and I don't know if you have our website up there right now, but it really kind of talks about the different lender letters, and we're coming up with new and improved things that are happening all the time. So definitely pay attention to the changes, because it's changing rapidly. So moving on to that, after we've determined from the forbearance that the hardship has been resolved, then we would really move into what we call the extend modification. Now, with the extend modification, we essentially allow the homeowner to basically extend the maturity date by the missed number of payments. So, the best example I can look at is that, let's just say that you have somebody out there that had a 30-year mortgage. They've paid down 10 years of it, so they only owe 20 years. And then now they have 6 months of payments that they have to do something with. So effectively what would happen is that we would extend that term out to 20 years and 6 months. So basically we're just taking that delinquency and we're moving it to we're just extending out the term by that amount. So it's something to understand that there is a borrower response package is not required for this, but the servicer must establish a quality right party contact just to make sure that the payment's affordable, because this hardship, the reason I was talking about it earlier, the hardship could actually be something that has extended well beyond just a job loss, or the fact that they might have had a job and now that they got their job back, they might be making less money. So we just want to make sure that this payment is still something that's sustainable for them, because again, we want to set them up for success. So at that point, we go, if the extend mod doesn't really work out for them, we look at something called the cap and extend modification. Now, with the cap and extend modification, effectively what happens is that we're taking that delinquency and we're rolling it back into the loan, and then we're extending out the term to as many months as you need in order to effectively keep the same mortgage payment. Now, there's just a subtle difference between the cap and extend and the extend mod, where the extend mod, we're extending out the term to whatever the payments were that they missed, so that's 6 months. But in this case, you might have had tax payments. You might have had escrow shortages, whatever might have happened during that time, tax payments or insurance or whatever, you might need to roll that back in. So we might need to extend out that term a little bit longer. Now, this is another scenario here that where a borrower response package is not going to be required, but we have to maintain that there is a quality right party contact, again, to make sure that the payment's really affordable and that they can sustain it. Again, the bottom line here is that we really want to be able to set this particular customer up for success. I mean, we don't want to put them in a situation that you're going to be talking to them 6 or 8 months later in order to say, hey, now I'm back in the same situation that I was in. All right, so now the last line of defense here, if those two options, let's say the borrower is saying, you know what, I can't maintain my current mortgage payment. It's something that I can't do. It could be a situation where their company might have lost clientele based on everything that's happened, and they're having to cut salaries. And we're seeing that happen like right now, where people are saying, I'm going to have to take a reduced salary in order to keep people from being laid off. So at that point, we go to the flex modification. Now, the flex modification really allows the homeowner to capitalize the delinquency into the mortgage. And essentially what they're doing, they're extending out the term to 40 years. And this actually is going to give the homeowner the best chance at a lowered payment. So again, like I said, we could be a situation where they're saying, hey, you know what, I can't make my current mortgage payment. What other options are out there for me? Now, with this particular option, if a borrower response package is not going to be required if the delinquency is greater than 90 days. If the delinquency is less than 90 days, then we're going to ask them to fill out a complete package in order to be evaluated for it. So again, this is one of those deals where, what are we trying to do here? We're trying to help these people in the best possible way we can. And if it's a payment scenario, then maybe the flex mod is going to be the best scenario for them. And that was pretty much it on the options there, but are definitely on any kind of closing remarks based on what I just said. Understand that there's other resources out there. There's several resources that we have. Both Fannie and Freddie have several resources on their websites. I really want to talk to the Fannie Mae resources that we have, is that you can access our website at fanniemae.com. There's COVID-19 responses in there. Just click on that. It'll give you the most up-to-date lender letters that are out there, and it'll basically tell you what's available. Another option out there is knowyouroptions.com. That particular website is updated pretty much daily, but it gives you the most up-to-date information about what's going on, and it's also something you want to refer, your borrowers out to. You want to make sure that the homeowners out there have access to that website, because it gives you a lot of information, and it also has a link out there to find out, okay, who owns my loan, so you can actually click on that. And then another option out there is our servicing support center. You can actually find out more information based on what's really available out there as well. So with that being said, I wanted to open it up for any questions that it looks like we have, about 5 minutes left. So I wanted to open it up for questions about what's going on, and if there's anything that we can respond to.
Great, thank you, Rob, so much. And Dan, please feel free to chime in with these kinds of questions as well. Many people are asking, do you guys have like a cheat sheet for the modification options that make it really clear what people would qualify for?
Well, I can answer that, and I know that Dan could probably has resources as well. We have a resource out there, and it's a job aid. It's actually in the approval phases right now. So please understand, I mean, all this stuff is happening so fast. So we've got a job aid out there that we'll be able to get out to you. I'm thinking probably by Wednesday. We just received legal approval on it this morning, and we have a couple more signatures to be able to get done. But we'll probably have that one ready by tomorrow and be able to have to send it out to everybody on by Wednesday. But we'll also have it on our website as well.
Yeah, same here on the Freddie Mac site. On the site that I believe you are either showing or will send Emily, at the very bottom, there's an additional resources section that has a lot of different fact sheets, FAQs, and desk reference documents. Right now it's not up there yet, but it will be posted there. So if folks continue to look back into that site, everything related to COVID-19 is on that page.
Wonderful. Another question was, is the servicer allowed to only offer certain modification options to particular borrowers? Or are they actually required to offer all of the ones that you're mentioning?
I can answer from our point of view that they're supposed to be offering everything that's out there, because this is not necessarily a Fannie Freddie thing. This is a CARES Act. I mean, it basically talks about everything out there that's being available. So yes, the forbearance needs to be offered out there, as well as the other options that I just went over, and that is a Fannie and a Freddie thing. So yes, they shouldn't be withholding anything.
Okay, great. And another question is, can you talk about any protections or advice for tenants in properties whose loans are owned by Fannie or Freddie?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear the whole question. Something about protection. So, Dan,
yes,
if you heard it better, go ahead and answer. I'm sorry.
Well, this is Cheryl.
Sure. So,
oh, go ahead, Dan.
I was going to qualify my answer by saying that on the single-family side, right, on loans that we own and purchase through our single-family business, which are 1 to 4 unit properties. If the property is an investment property being used as a rental property, we provide the flexibilities that we just walk you through to the owner of the property, but we do not have any type of contractual agreement related to the rental of that property. On our multifamily side of the business, we do have also a forbearance flexibility that we've announced, and a condition for the borrowers, which in this case would be multifamily properties. A condition for that borrower to take advantage of the forbearance period is to provide protections for the renter, and we have restrictions in place related to any type of evictions, and during the forbearance period, the owner of the property is not to can extend rent relief to the renters that are renting from their building. That's a multifamily business side. I'm representing single family, so I can give you just that high level answer, and I can follow up through Emily with the site where we have more information related to tenant protections.
That would be great, Dan.
If I can add one more resource on the Fannie side. So we also have the Disaster Response Network. And so that's both for borrowers as well as renters. And so if you go to our Know Your Options site, you'll see information that you can direct any renters to that website to contact that partner.
Okay, well, that's wonderful. So we've reached the end of our time, and I just want to tell you, thank you so much. You've provided such a wealth of information here today. And for those on the call, please know that we will be following up with an email with resources and a link to the recording of the webinar. I know that this was a lot all at once. And so we will be sharing the resources that all of our partners highlighted today as well. And with that, this concludes the end of our webinar. Thank you everyone for joining us. Stay safe and well.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.